A pleasure to meet all at last. So, we're on to our next piece of Vlog-A-Thon related stuff. And while I have spent a few vlogs in a row talking about 2023, it's now about time to move on to 2024. So, what I've got to say about 2024 are a good amount of things. A lot of the usual business on YouTube, in real life, with jobs, trips, etc. Some special events, and some not so good things are all worth accounting for. But much like when I talked about 2023, I'm pretty much going to be doing this in a quarterly fashion. As in, I'll spend the next 4 vlogs talking about the year in general, and I'll do the same for 2025. So, let's get started here. The first quarter of 2024 was, albeit a bit on the more eventful side of things, because first off, there were indeed more trips than I've had in 2024 alone. In fact, it was practically enough to rival the likes of other years. It practically surpassed 2023 by a few miles, and I'll explain more about it in the coming vlogs that I have following up with this one. But the first quarter did indeed have a good amount of trips going for it. First off, there was a lot of road-related things that occurred, and we know that in most cases, with trips that usually take place well outside of the hometown of Menominee Falls, those of course correlated to air travel or train travel or ship travel. But in most cases, a lot of the trips that we took in 2024, like some other cases we've had over the years, were mainly because of the roads. And I can certainly account for the fact that I had a Nissan Juke at the time, and even during 2024, there's going to be a lot more for me to say about the Nissan Juke as a whole. But knowing that was my previous car, there will of course be an explanation of where it is now and also what happened to it. So I'll of course talk a bit more about those in the appropriate parts of the Vlog-A-Thon. But anyways, January and February were especially big points in which I had done some trips, mainly heading back to North Carolina, just like I did the year before. Instead, we did February instead of March. It was seemingly common throughout the early 2020s that up until this point we were doing it in March, as well as sometimes having a second trip. But we basically made one trip for myself, and that of course was in February. And while there were a few more following up, especially afterwards, they were mostly with certain peers that I've had, especially with my brother and sister-in-law. And keep in mind, my brother was still going to college in North Carolina, in the town of Greenville. But most importantly, this would be, believe it or not, the last time I would ever visit Greenville, because 2 years later, I haven't made another trip since then, and I'll of course explain why. Because for now, this would basically be the point in which that time in Greenville would still go on as normal. But I will say that some of the most eventful things that would have transpired, especially during March of 2024. Because first off, the house was all alone. And I, of course, was the sole person inside. If you want to include Choo Choo and Kramer, that's fine too, but they, of course, aren't exactly like me, per se. The thing is, though, if I had to talk about any real big negative about 2024, it would have to be a thing known as thyroiditis. Essentially, it's the condition in which that the thyroid gland, which of course is the butterfly-shaped piece that regulates metabolism, as well as bodily energy naturally coming from production of various metabolic hormones, it ended up inflamed. So to speak, this was especially apparent throughout January and February, as I had felt notable amounts of metabolic increases. This came to be known as hyperthyroidism, in which that the production of hormones ended up so great that a number of symptoms began to appear. However, I'd say that the true peaking of this condition truly came to be by March 20th of that year, in 2024. So to speak, I've unfortunately had to be rushed to the hospital, to the ER more specifically, because one night I ended up getting some violent tremors in my system, as well as a multitude of other issues. My bodily temperature was spiking up incredibly high, my heart rate had jumped up to at least 150 BPM, and of course I was accumulating a ton of sweat, despite the fact that it was still the middle of March, a time in which that it's normally pretty cool outside, usually at around 40 degrees. But all of this culminated in a pretty big issue that I had to be checked out. I ended up missing nearly 2 days worth of work because of that. Also, when the doctors had examined me, they found out what it was. It not only progressed to hyperthyroidism on top of inflammation, but thyroid storm. Yes, this is essentially a more extreme case of thyroid dysfunction in which that the amount of metabolic hormones runs so great that it can actually be lethal if left untreated. So to put it into perspective, I got rushed to the hospital because a condition almost caused me to die. So my metabolism ended up so great that the body and mind probably would not have handled the extreme amounts of stress that was put upon it. So the thing is, upon being released from the hospital, I was appointed to my physician immediately after. And the following day that came around, I would then be told, at the very least, to try to recover from this as much as possible, as in to try to avoid certain factors that would increase the stress and therefore prevent me from recovering more properly. And that's not only because of the fact that I was able to get my condition stabilized at the ER, but upon being released, I still had hyperthyroidism symptoms present. This, of course, included an increased heart rate, trouble sleeping, bodily sweat, and temperature, of course, with a number of other things that also went down. This actually is, believe it or not, why I ended up losing a good amount of weight. So, and all those people out there that were wondering how from 2023 to 2024, how I ended up losing over 70 pounds, well, the truth is, apart from having to reshape my diet because of the condition I was suffering from at the time, especially leading throughout the last couple of weeks of March, the hyperthyroidism symptoms were primarily allowing for my body to drop a good amount of weight because of the heightened metabolism, especially when it was still under rest. So, to put it simply, even though I wasn't doing very much activity, I was still under a lot of metabolism. Metabolism that my body indeed used to its advantage to lose a lot of extra pounds. And so, even to this day, I still do have a lot of reminders on the fact that my metabolism had greatly increased. And it dropped a lot of pounds as a result of this. I lost a lot of pounds in fats. Some skin ended up getting lost as well. A lot of this was just on the more natural end of things. But as we know, thyroiditis is something that should not be a factor in losing weight, much like most things in life. We don't need tapeworms, we don't need starvation or anorexia or bulimia, nothing like that. No, if I really wanted to go and lose weight, we'd shape up the diet and exercise a bit, and also look into the ideas of what other factors may be causing me to be prevented from losing any weight any further. That's always a good idea to look into. What are the factors in mind that you could think of that might be preventing you from losing any weight? So, it's a question that some people out there probably might have, but have little answers to. So, I feel like that's enough said. I made a lot of trips on the road, had a lot of things with my job and with my time on YouTube, But the real big thing about 2024, especially throughout spring, was of course thyroiditis. So tune in next time on the Vlog-A-Thon, and I will of course talk more about that and many other things to come just as well. So make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.